Total War Pharaoh starts in the year 1205 BCE, but we're about 90 years prior to that, and far north of the Nile Delta, as we continue our story today about who the Hittites are, and how they got to the situation they find themselves in at the start of the game. If you'll remember from last time, after many false starts, the Hittite Empire has finally taken off, following the conquests of Shipililiuma I, then managed to hold on through a devastating plague under Urhiteshab II. We're now on to King Muwatalli, who's going to take three major decisions in his career that will still be affecting the political landscape at the start of the game, and indeed will affect the ultimate collapse of the kingdom. The first thing Muwatalli does is try and figure out a long-term solution to the security situation. Being located in the middle of mountainous Anatolia, they face threats on all four borders. In the south, they have a century-long rivalry with Egypt over the various towns and petty kingdoms of the Levant, and under Ramesses II, Egypt has the military potential to come in and sweep all of the wealthiest areas out of the empire if Muwatalli isn't careful. In the north, they have the Kaskans, a barbarian group who's been around for most of Hittite history, and rather like the steppe nomads of North China, can't be completely wiped out and always have to be defended against, and have the potential to take many of the holiest cities of the empire if Muwatalli isn't careful. In the west, the Mycenaean Proto-Greeks are beginning to raid and settle along what's going to become known as the Ionian coast, unsettling an already poorly held region, and the difficulties there have the potential to pull away many of the most important military assets for the empire if Muwatalli isn't careful. And on the east, the former power of the Hurrian Mitanni kingdom has been replaced by the rising Middle Assyrian kingdom, who have the potential to dominate the entire Near East and conquer Anatolia completely if Muwatalli isn't careful. Egypt's Nile heartland was relatively secure for most of its history, but the land of Hatti in the core of the Hittite Empire was never really free from existential threat for its entire history. They did come up with some pretty clever ways to handle this, the most interesting being their strategic flexibility with troop equipment. In the rugged terrain of Anatolia, spears, which are traditionally the most common weapon for ancient militaries, were discarded, or at least left in camp, in favor of short sword and shield, or axe and shield. The almost completely unarmored Hittite battle group would hide some or all of their forces in parts of the terrain and fall upon the enemy in a hard shock assault at extremely close range, breaking the enemy's spirit quickly for maximum war captives with minimal losses. In the flat deserts and plains of Syria, Phoenicia, and Mesopotamia, there was less opportunity for surprise attacks, though these were employed where possible. But here the warriors covered themselves head to toe in long flowing robes for protection against the sun, and took up spears instead of swords. They fought on open plains in spear blocks, acting here as more of the anvil instead of the hammer. The hammer, of course, was the chariot, especially on open battlefields, which in the Hittite case was far heavier than those of their neighbors. But both chariot and infantry will be getting their own episodes later. The important thing here is that it's very much a shock assault army that often relies on ambushes and night attacks to multiply the advantage and minimize casualties. But in game terms, we could say it's a high attack, low defense strategy. We can often see that rather than defend, they simply lose their borders, then retake them later. It's a strategy that does provide more epic moments in Hittite history, but it also exhausts the land and the people much faster. Now, having one king lead the armies, and having threats in all directions, is great when you have a super energetic and powerful king like the conqueror Shipililiuma. Or of course when you're a hyperactive Total War player used to speedrunning world conquests. Exhaustion just doesn't seem to affect some people. But most of the time, this is a recipe for disaster. And so Muwatalli decides to make a strategic level change here by appointing his brother, named Atushili, to be the commander of the north. The deal is basically, he gets a modest number of troops and some northern border towns to supply them, and he gets to be basically complete ruler over all these things, plus whatever else he manages to recover from the northern Kaskan barbarians. This instantly makes Atushili the most powerful subordinate ruler that the Hittite Empire has ever seen, but also allows Muwatalli to take the resources of the entire rest of the empire and focus them on the critical southern border with Egypt. As part of this, he builds a whole new city, Urhiteshab. It's a new capital down in the south, what would in classical times be known as Cilicia, at least the region. Archaeologists are still looking for this city, though recently a few promising candidates have turned up, but apparently it was quite a nice town. Most crucially, it was in a much better place for trade, logistics, and for receiving information, especially from the south, than the old capital of Hattusha was. And it's from this base of operations that Muwatalli was able to launch his major campaign into the Levant, responding to the expansionist aggression of Pharaoh Ramesses II. All this culminated in the famous Battle of Kadesh, which by some estimates may have seen about 40,000 men on the field, and by other estimates may have had a bit over 40,000 men on each side, and which I hope will show up in Total War Pharaoh as one of the custom battles. Now, I already did a full podcast episode just on the battle itself, link in the description. But ultimately, the battle was a tactical victory for Egypt, but a strategic victory for the Hittites. In the aftermath, Muwatalli needs a skilled commander and a powerful leader to manage the south for him while he took care of all the other empire stuff. And since Hattusili had been doing such a good job up in the north, he gets brought down to manage now both the northern and southern borders simultaneously. But of course, the whole point of having an overall leader of a region is that he can be present to put out the fires there. And once he gets transferred south, some jealous ex-governors up in the north conspire to steal Hattusili's land up in the north. So Atushili has to march back up north and handle a pretty messy situation there. Meanwhile, however, Muwatalli dies of natural causes, and there is a bit of a succession issue. There's no primary heir here, no one of first rank who can obviously take the throne. Instead, there are two second-rank candidates, a concubine's son named Urhiteshab, and Muwatalli's younger brother, Atushili. Conflict appears inevitable between the most powerful governor of the empire and just some concubine's son. But fortunately, Atushili is still busy putting down the rebellion in his own land, and Urhiteshab is able to take the throne without conflict, and takes the throne name Urhiteshab III. However, everyone in the empire knows that Atushili, even though he does eventually go along with the succession, is a far better military leader, a far better ruler, far more experienced, and just generally better in every way than Urhiteshab. And it seems no one's more aware of this than the young king himself. Everything Urhiteshab does during his reign is designed to build legitimacy. He moves his capital back from Urhiteshab to the traditional city of Hattusha, which has a profound religious significance and also re-empowers much older noble families. He does a lot of shuffling government positions to make sure people loyal to him are in positions of power. Now, these are two pretty solid ideas in general for a new king. But then, because he's terrified of his uncle Atushili, he slowly begins to remove fiefdoms from his uncle's control. And in a move straight out of Crusader kings, he eventually has his uncle weak enough that he feels secure in stripping Hatushili's final holdings and removing his royal status completely. Atushili, up to this point, has been remarkably accommodating to the little rascal, but when his last city is stripped from him, that's a bridge too far. Atushili takes the most successful army in the kingdom straight to the capital, lays siege to the city for possibly a few months, and may actually wage a year or two of warfare. We're not completely sure how things went, but ultimately Atushili takes the capital, and with it most of the empire. Urhiteshab, however, is able to escape into the deserts, and for various reasons Atushili is unable to finish him off, and his ultimate fate is a mystery. Anyway, Atushili now has growing threats in the north, west, and east. Kaskans in the north, Assyria in the east, and Greeks and Lucans in the west. So he, with his wife's help, concludes a peace treaty with Ramesses II down in the south, which will last until the end of the Hittite Empire, freeing up badly needed resources from the south. Then for the west, he goes and he fights some battles for himself, but the empire is getting exhausted, and also starting to feel some famine from climate effects and manpower shortages. So he tries what worked so well for him. He selects a royal nephew to go be the direct ruler of Tarhantasha, to have near complete autonomy there and be in charge of defending the entire western border, and just whatever you can conquer and plunder along that border, that'll be yours to give you resources to keep conquering. Now that royal nephew, a younger son of Muatali, was named Urhiteshab, not to be confused with Urhiteshab, and who will change his name on ascending to the Tarhantasha throne to Kurunta. More on him when we get to his own episode. Anyway, Atushili has a bunch of adventures. Then he dies and his son takes over, Tudhaliya IV. Tudhaliya is a fantastic diplomat, able to keep all the various vassals happy, even though everyone is starving. The borders are constantly being tested, and his mother is busy controversially reforming the Hittite religion. He's also a military leader, defeating a major Western revolt and eliminating the Greeks as a threat in that region. But a lot of that wasn't actually him, some of it was his vassals, and some of it was the wider Bronze Age collapse which hit the Greeks before it hit Asia. Meanwhile, the Hittite government was really too busy to do too much over in the West. And then, in the middle of all of this, the Mycenaeans go completely silent. Now this would be a source of worry for Tudhaliya, except that he's way too busy dealing with the Assyrians and a proxy war in the Mitanni Rump state. Now, the Hittites and the Assyrians do eventually fight the Battle of Nihriya, which Tudhaliya loses, but various other matters keep the Assyrians from actually being a threat until well after the Bronze Age collapse has come and gone. Speaking of Bronze Age collapse, Tudhaliya sees that Cyprus is exceptionally weak at the moment for, shall we say, unclear reasons, and he goes and conquers it. Then the reasons become clear, and there's all sorts of naval raids, and pretty quickly they lose control of Cyprus. And then the Sea Peoples overwhelm and close off the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Kurunta decides for no clear reason that he should be the great king of the Hittites, conquers Hattusha while Tudhaliya is out leading some campaign, but then Tudhaliya comes home and he kicks the usurper back to Tarhantasha, and then Tudhaliya dies of old age in 1209 BCE. His son then comes to power, Arnawanda III. And at this point, we're very nearly at the opening of Total War Pharaoh, and the Hittite Empire is in pretty good shape. The enemies to the east and west and south have all been pacified, and there are some signs that the famine might be starting to abate. But then a massive revolt breaks out from the nobility, and international trade collapses with the fall of Babylon and the exhaustion of Assyria. And the sea people arrive, and the Luca and Kaskans in Anatolia start attacking, and the desert people start attacking. And then, as if he's too stressed out from everything falling apart all at once, Arnawanda just dies, pretty much right away after ruling for maybe a year, maybe yet less, and his younger brother Shipililiuma II takes over. Now, this Shipililiuma is the main Hittite leader in Total War Pharaoh, and as we open in 1205 BCE, he's been on the throne for about 2 years. And as I pointed out in my fuller look at the Hittites over on the Oldest Stories podcast, he really had a good reason to think that he would be able to turn everything around and save the empire, just as it had been clawed from the precipice multiple times before. But he doesn't, and instead he ends his life by fleeing Hattusha and then probably dies in the wilderness. But now you have a sense of who the Hittites are at the start of the game. We'll look at 2 leaders soon, Kurunta and Shipililiuma, so make sure you're subscribed to get those, because each is a fascinating faction leader in his own right, and I'm very interested to see how all of it gets translated over to Total War Pharaoh, if they get properly represented, or if they end up as just a sideshow to the Egyptian drama. Definitely let me know what you think down in the comments, or feel free to ask any questions down there as well. But until then, thank you for watching.